Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, we all get through the day using our senses, right? Touch, sight, sound.
The usual suspects.
Exactly. And they give us this feeling of, well, solid boundaries. Like, I'm here, the microphone is there, everything's separate.
It's comfortable, that separation.
Yeah.
Necessary, maybe, for day-to-day stuff. But it's definitely a limited viewpoint, isn't it? Philosophically speaking.
Right, because what if those boundaries aren't nearly as solid as we think? What if they're, well, kind of arbitrary?
Uh-huh.
Which brings us to the really mind-bending question for today's deep dive. What if you could, just for a moment, actually become your friend? Not just guess what they're thinking, but truly enter into their essence.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought, but it's precisely the kind of territory we're exploring today. We're looking at the mechanics behind consciousness, behind reality itself, where something like that isn't fantasy, it's, well, maybe just an undeveloped capacity.
And our guide for this exploration is pretty spectacular. We're diving into session 38 of the Early Sessions, book 1 of Seth material. This one was recorded way back on March 25, 1964.
And it is dense. I mean, packed with cosmology, insights into how these sessions even work, some pretty stern advice, and surprisingly, some really funny moments, too.
Absolutely. So think of us as your field guides for this session. We're going to pull out the key ideas, the connections, the really impactful stuff so you get the core understanding without having to wade through everything all at once. It's a shortcut to getting informed.
Okay, but before we jump in, the necessary acknowledgments. We have to credit the Seth material, of course, and the publisher, New Awareness Network.
And we really do encourage you, if this stuff sparks your interest, to go read the original books. Check out the New Awareness Network website, sethcenter.com/the early sessions. They've got the bookstore there.
Definitely worth it.
And as always, just to be clear, this deep dive is purely for educational purposes. We distribute it free of charge on all the major platforms.
Which ties into something Seth actually brings up in this very session. We are not here to give out stock tips.
No, definitely not. We'll get to that amusing little side story later. But first, let's set the scene. The notes for session 38 mention something interesting about Jane Roberts, or Rupert, the medium.
Yeah, she was apparently feeling really out of it beforehand. Like, unalert is the word used. Tired.
She even took a nap, went for a walk, trying to get centered, feeling nervous about whether the session would even work properly.
Which makes what happened next even more striking. Because once the session started, she was apparently pacing quite fast, delivering this incredibly complex, layered material flawlessly.
And the weirdest part, the notes say she actually felt better afterwards, energized even.
It's a fantastic little paradox, isn't it? It really highlights that the energy source for this kind of deep, channeled work seems completely separate from the everyday physical or mental fatigue of the outer self.
Yeah, tapping into that deeper source can actually be restorative, even when the content itself is heavy.
Okay, so where does Seth actually begin session 38? Not with some grand cosmological statement, but with admin, basically.
Right. Practical matters first. He comments on this letter Jane had received from the ASPR, the American Society for Psychical Research.
And they were asking for, essentially, a psychic party trick.
Yeah.
Could Seth please describe one of their scientists, provide some concrete proof?
The classic demand, verifiable evidence.
Exactly. And Seth's reaction is immediate. He calls the letter an apple for the teacher. He sees it for what it is, a test, and he flat out refuses to perform on command like that.
But his reasoning is really important, isn't it? It's not just stubbornness. It's about protecting the channel, protecting Rupert.
Absolutely. He's crystal clear about it. He says, and I'm quoting here, "I do not intend to let Rupert in on any of my plans or intentions as far as demonstrations are concerned."
Okay, why, though? You'd think knowing a demonstration was planned might make the medium more confident, not less.
That's the logical assumption from our side, maybe. But Seth explains that knowing beforehand introduces all sorts of problems. Primarily, performance anxiety, basically. He says, if Rupert knew, he would have been nervous and self-conscious. The conscious mind, the ego, would immediately jump in, worrying, trying too hard, second-guessing.
And that would muddy the waters. It would interfere with the clean transmission of whatever information was supposed to come through.
Precisely. The ego's anticipation and desire to get it right would actually distort the process. So the demonstration, if it happens, has to be spontaneous. A surprise.
So it flows directly from that deeper level, bypassing the conscious mind's filters and anxieties. It's a protective strategy for the integrity of the information.
Exactly. Now, he does acknowledge they had recently done something like a demonstration, remember,
Yeah.
for their friend Philip.
Right, the slight demonstration, what was that about again?
It involves some kind of clairvoyant knowledge.
Yeah.
Seth explains there were two very specific reasons for that instance.
Okay, what were they?
First, the information itself was genuinely helpful to Philip. Seth had told him something like, his abilities along the lines of electronics have not been developed to near capacity. It was practical advice, a nudge.
So purpose number one was actual useful guidance for the recipient. Makes sense. And the second?
The second was purely internal. It boosted Rupert's confidence in these sessions. It served to reassure Jane that the connection was real and strong.
Okay, so it was targeted validation for the participants themselves, not a performance for outsiders.
Right. It maintained the necessary internal trust and confidence. But scheduling a demonstration for an external organization like the ASPR, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
It crosses the line into performance, into seeking external validation, which pollutes the process.
Seth doesn't seem too bothered about whether the ASPR believes him or not, does he?
Not in the slightest. He sounds utterly confident. He basically says he could produce the kind of plum they're looking for, but he's not going to jump through their hoops.
And his final word on it is pretty definitive.
Yeah, something like, the material will make its own friends, and I suppose its own enemies. It stands on its own merits. It doesn't need external validation to prove its worth. Those who resonate with it will find it.
Which really sets the tone. He's not here to convince skeptics. He's here to deliver the information.
Okay, so after settling that whole ASPR business, Seth shifts gears. He goes straight into the practical work Jane and Joseph need to be doing.
Right. The focus turns inward, development work, and the absolute top priority.
The quiet exercise of their inner senses. He really hammers this home.
He says something like, you will benefit through the quiet exercise of your inner senses. This cannot be stressed too strongly.
Exactly. It's not optional.
Correct.
This internal practice is what's going to give them the dimension needed to truly grasp the deeper aspects of the material he's delivering in the sessions.
It's the difference between just hearing the words and actually developing the internal equipment to perceive what he's talking about.
Precisely. But before he dives into the specifics of the senses, he takes a moment to give Joseph a pat on the back.
Yeah, he acknowledges Joseph's personal growth, says he navigated a most difficult winter season and came out with more stature, understanding, and ability.
It suggests Joseph had been going through some tough times, personally or maybe relationally.
And Seth acknowledges his progress, which is nice. But then comes the really funny part, his comment on his own teaching style.
Yes. He basically apologizes for being tough on them earlier. He says, I hope that this will make up for all the yelling I did earlier.
Yelling. Can you imagine? A non-physical entity admitting he was basically yelling at them.
But he follows it up immediately, doesn't he? He adds, nevertheless, I believe that you have benefited from my rather stern and sometimes heavy-handed lectures.
It's brilliant. It's like tough love coaching from beyond the veil. He's saying, yeah, it was hard on you, but look, it worked.
It shows a real self-awareness and also maybe hints that different stages of development require different approaches. Maybe early on they needed that stern and heavy-handed approach to break through their existing beliefs or, resistance.
That makes sense. Sometimes you need a metaphorical smack upside the head to pay attention.
Especially when dealing with concepts that challenge your whole view of reality. The ego puts up a fight. Maybe the yelling was needed to get past that initial resistance.
Okay, so moving from teaching style to the actual inner senses, Seth makes a crucial point about how they're structured differently from our familiar outer senses.
Right. We tend to think of sight, sound, touch, etc. as separate channels. But the inner senses, he says, are much more integrated.
They fit together in a much more organized fashion and tend to overlap. The lines between them are blurry.
Yeah, the functions are so intertwined that trying to describe them one by one is inherently difficult and a bit artificial. Ideally, they work as a whole.
So if they're meant to work as a unit, why do we, or why did Jane and Joseph experience them separately at all? Why the need to list them out?
Well, according to Seth, that fragmentation is basically down to us, our limitations. He uses the phrase, your own ineptitude.
Ouch. So we're clumsy with them.
Kind of. He suggests we instinctively try to apply the rules of our outer senses to our inner experiences. We try to isolate or focus on one aspect, like consciously trying to listen to one conversation in a noisy room. And in doing so, we artificially separate what's meant to be a unified perception.
We impose our compartmentalized view onto a holistic system.
Exactly. And overcoming that ineptitude, Learning to allow that unified perception is part of the training. Which brings us to the homework.
Ah, yes, the ESP cards. Joseph notes he's apparently doing better with this than Jane is.
The point of the card practice wasn't really about getting a high score to send off to Duke University, though they did discuss that possibility.
No, the real goal was internal.
Right. It was about developing subconscious cues, learning to feel when you're on the right track, to sense that connection before you actually check the card.
Getting that inner nudge, that intuitive hit, and recognizing it as the signal.
Precisely. He calls it a strange mixture of discipline and freedom. You need the discipline to actually sit down and do the practice, but also the mental freedom to allow those subtle subconscious signals to register consciously.
It's practice in recognizing the inner data stream, foundational stuff.
Okay, so Seth has laid the groundwork. He's explained why the inner senses are hard to talk about because they're interconnected and we tend to fragment them.
Right. He keeps reminding them that he's giving them piecemeal data for simplicity, but the reality is unified.
But he pushes on because understanding these distinct functions, even if artificially separated, is necessary. And he starts with the fourth inner sense.
Conceptual cognition. This one sounds pretty abstract right off the bat.
It is. Its defining feature is that it operates outside of our linear concept of time. Past, present, future, they don't apply in the same way. This sense grasps a concept, any concept, instantly and completely, holistically.
So it's not like learning about something step by step. It's
Yeah.
a total immersion.
Sort of. He uses a really interesting analogy. He says you actually experience the concept in much the same manner that you might work out an idea through a drama, if you follow me.
Like watching a play that perfectly embodies, say, justice or compassion.
More than watching. It's like being in the play. But here's the kicker. Only in this case, the dramatization provides its own actors.
Whoa. Okay, unpack that. The concept itself generates the experience.
That's how it reads. The concept isn't just an abstract idea. It's a living dynamic that contains its own information, its own necessary perspectives, its own characters, maybe. And the fourth sense allows you to directly engage with that self-contained living reality of the concept all at once.
That's mind-blowing. The knowledge isn't just received, it's experienced as a self-creating reality.
Pretty much. Seth actually says he's going to hold off on discussing this one in more detail for now because they need more foundational understanding first. But just knowing it exists helps set the stage for the next one.
Which is the fifth inner sense, cognition of the knowledgeable essence. And this is the one you flagged as potentially unsettling.
Yeah, this is where it gets really intimate and, for many people, perhaps uncomfortable. The core function involves an intimate becoming or transformation of self into something else.
Becoming something else. Like what?
Specifically, he says, becoming living tissue.
Okay, pause. Living tissue, he means. Like another person. Or an animal.
The implication seems to be primarily other conscious entities, yes. He gives the analogy. Instead of just trying to understand your friend through observation or empathy.
Uh-huh.
This sense, fully utilized, would allow you to enter into your friend.
Enter into, okay, yeah. That sounds invasive, violating. Our whole sense of self is built on the idea of being separate, contained within our own skin.
Exactly. And Seth anticipates this reaction immediately. He says quite directly. Now, this certainly sounds not only unbelievable, but probably undesirable. And if so, I appreciate and understand your reactions.
He gets that it sounds creepy.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then he adds that he can't let those unfavorable reactions govern what material I give you. The truth is the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
So what prevents this from being like psychic trespassing? If you can just enter into someone, isn't that a massive violation?
That's the critical safety question, and Seth provides strong reassurances. He states clearly that this sense is immensely beneficial and, crucially, is not misused in any way by those able to use it.
How can you be so sure?
Because, he says, these higher senses simply do not function until they can be handled correctly. There's an inherent ethical safeguard built in. You don't get access to this level of ability until the inner self, the part wielding it, has reached a sufficient level of maturity, responsibility, and, well, harmlessness.
So the capacity only unlocks when the user is trustworthy, essentially.
That seems to be the principle. He emphasizes it in no way involves invasion or control. It's about direct, instantaneous cognition of the essence of living tissue.
That word tissue again. He seems to be using it to mean the sort of energetic boundary or capsule that defines an individual entity.
That's a good way to put it. It's the boundary of the self's immediate reality. And this sense allows a temporary cognitive merging across that boundary. Not a takeover, just knowing.
The closest thing we have in everyday language is probably deep empathy, right? Really trying to put yourself in someone else's place.
Exactly. Seth says that phrase is the closest approximation on our physical plane. The fifth sense is the underlying mechanism that makes even our limited form of empathy possible. Without some faint, filtered input from this sense, he argues, no man would even come close to understanding another.
Wow. So even basic social understanding relies on a tiny trickle from this incredibly profound sense of becoming.
Okay, so we've just grappled with the idea of cognitively entering into another living being via the fifth sense. That's a huge conceptual leap.
Yeah, it really challenges our idea of fixed boundaries.
Right. And Seth seems to know this, because immediately after introducing Sense 5, he pivots to what seems like a totally different topic. Physics. Or, more accurately, metaphysics, pretending to be physics.
Why the sudden shift?
He connects them explicitly later. He wants to show that the idea of crossing the boundary of living tissue isn't actually as bizarre as it sounds once you understand the true nature of that tissue itself.
Ah, okay, so he's undermining the idea that the tissue is solid and fixed in the first place.
Precisely. He makes a bold claim. Molecular construction is formed from the inside and is not rigid.
That flies in the face of conventional material science, obviously.
Completely. He critiques scientists for projecting apparent universal laws over into areas in which they do not apply. Basically saying, we assume everything is fundamentally solid and external just because that's how it appears to our limited outer senses.
So what's his alternative model?
It's a complete reversal of priority, he states. Vitality gives itself a shape and form. The form does not impose itself upon the vitality.
Okay, let's break that down. Vitality, consciousness, life, energy, the essence comes first. And it creates the form, the physical structure.
Exactly. It sculpts its own vehicle. This isn't consciousness trapped in matter. It's consciousness generating matter as an expression or tool.
Which, if true, means that form is inherently changeable, malleable.
Bingo. If vitality dictates form, then changing form at will becomes, at least theoretically, possible. And Seth argues this isn't just some abstract potential on other planes. It happens here, on our physical plane.
How? We don't see people shape-shifting on the street.
No, because on our plane, he says, these changes in form are driven by the subconscious will, not the conscious mind. Our deeper self is constantly adjusting and maintaining our physical form based on its needs, beliefs, and intentions.
Okay, this is where it gets potentially uncomfortable again, isn't it? The example he uses.
Yeah, the ulcer analogy. It's a stark, perhaps even darkly humorous illustration of this principle.
He presents something like a stomach ulcer, not as a random malfunction, but as, what was the phrase? The introduction of another camouflage reality to the physical body.
It's a chilling way to put it. The ulcer isn't just a defect, it's a creation. Something new added to the physical structure.
Created by the unconscious will for reasons of its own. A variation on the original pattern.
Right. It implies that our deepest beliefs, stresses, unresolved conflicts can literally manifest as changes in our physical structure. The subconscious needs an outlet, a symbol, or a way to cope, and so it builds the ulcer, using the inherent fluidity of molecular structure.
That puts a terrifying amount of responsibility on us, doesn't it? If our subconscious is powerful enough to create illness.
It directly links our psychology to our physical reality. The body isn't a fixed machine that breaks down. It's a dynamic energy construct constantly being shaped from within. It's part of our personal camouflage universe, as he calls it.
Okay, so tying this back, Seth introduces this idea of fluid, subconsciously generated form right after the fifth sense.
To make the fifth sense seem less weird, he explicitly says he put these topics together so that you will finally understand that use of the fifth inner sense is not actually as strange as you may have thought it to be.
Because if our own form is fluid and created from within, then the idea of consciousness momentarily crossing the boundary of another equally fluid, internally generated form
Suddenly seems less like a violation of physical law and more like an interaction between two dynamic energy fields. The boundaries aren't solid walls. They're permeable conceptual edges.
We've covered the conceptual drama of the fourth sense and the intimate becoming of the fifth. Seth then introduces the last piece of the puzzle in this session, the sixth inner sense.
Right, and he positions this one as the most fundamental of all, the foundation stone.
Basic vitality knowledge. He calls it the most basic, rudimentary, yet absolutely essential sense. It contains the possibility of all the others.
Its function is quite profound. It's defined as the entity's innate working knowledge of the basic vitality of the universe.
Not just awareness of vitality, but working knowledge, like how to operate it.
Exactly. It's the inherent know-how required to manipulate the basic stuff of reality, consciousness, energy, vitality. He compares it to our physical sense of balance.
How so?
You don't consciously think about all the micro adjustments needed just to stand upright, right? Your body just knows how to maintain balance. The sixth sense is like that, but for reality construction.
It's the inner self's constant, automatic understanding of how to manage energy and maintain form.
Precisely. Seth states that without the constant use of this sense by the inner self-conscious ego, you couldn't even build or maintain your physical body or perceive the physical camouflage universe of our plane.
Wow. So it's the operating system running in the background, making any experience possible.
That's a great analogy. It's the foundational mechanism for constructing any reality on any plane. It's the knowledge of how to shape vitality into stable forms or camouflage.
And Seth flags this section as particularly important, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. He tells Jane and Joseph to read this part thoroughly. He says it's one of the basic parts of our material, a starting point from which many other critical discussions about reality creation will follow. It's cornerstone stuff.
Okay, so that rounds out the core teaching on the inner senses for this session. But then, just before wrapping up, we get that hilarious little detour.
The stock market fiasco. It's such a great moment of grounding reality intruding.
Apparently, a doctor friend had half-jokingly suggested they ask Seth for stock tips. You know, use the cosmic connection for something practical, like getting rich.
A perfectly understandable human impulse. But Seth's reaction is swift and decisive.
He basically shuts it down hard. He even references a previous attempt. Frank Watts made a few stabs in that direction and almost got severely wounded.
Sounds like Frank got told off quite severely. Seth is making it clear. That's not what these sessions are for.
But his reasoning is important. It's not just that it's trivial. Why does he refuse?
It's about protecting the integrity of the work. He acknowledges financial gain itself isn't bad. But he argues that if they started using the sessions successfully for market predictions, then theoretically our material would consist of stock reports. The focus would inevitably shift. Everyone would want in on the get-rich-quick scheme, and the actual deep knowledge, the core purpose of the sessions, would quickly disintegrate.
It would be diluted, corrupted by greed, the signal lost in the noise of financial speculation.
Exactly. He's protecting the channel and the mission, which is to impart fundamental knowledge to those genuinely seeking it, not to create a psychic Wall Street hotline. Too bad for the poor doctor, as the notes say.
And having laid down the law on that, Seth does something unusual. He ends the session a bit early.
Yeah, an unheard of bonus, he calls it.
Yeah.
And it's explicitly a reward for Rupert, for Jane.
He gives her the proverbial gold star. Why?
Because she persevered. She conducted the session effectively, channeling all this complex material, despite feeling tired and unwell beforehand. She allowed the information to come through, maybe even earlier than Seth expected.
It's a lovely moment of acknowledgement, shows that effort and dedication were genuinely appreciated, even by the sometimes stern teacher.
Now, this is where it gets really cool. We've talked about all these abstract ideas, senses beyond the usual 5, fluid reality, entering into other beings.
Yeah, stuff that can feel very theoretical.
Right. But the notes after session 38 give us concrete physical experiences that seem to directly illustrate these concepts in action. Specifically, Jane's experience a few days later.
Ah, the famous elephant head sensation. This one always stuck with me.
It's incredibly vivid. Jane was apparently lying on the couch, kind of drifting between sleep and waking, and she suddenly had this overwhelming physical sensation of expanding, of growing larger.
Not just feeling bigger, but like physically becoming enormous?
Exactly. She felt, in her words, as big as an elephant. The feeling was strongest in her head and arms. She described feeling her skull literally expanding, maybe to 2.5 feet wide.
Okay, that's not just a thought or an idea. That's a physical sensation of altered form and boundary. It's like a direct, low-level experience of that fluid reality Seth was just talking about.
Precisely. It's the inner self, which probably doesn't perceive itself as confined to the physical body's dimensions, giving the outer ego a brief, manageable taste of its actual state. It's that "I don't want to blast you off your feet" demonstration Seth mentioned.
A little glimpse behind the curtain of camouflage reality.
And it wasn't just the feeling of size. Her internal sensory field changed too. With her eyes closed, the usual blackness she perceived became infinitely large.
Whoa, so her sphere of awareness just ballooned outwards.
Seems like it. The normal boundaries of her perception dissolved momentarily. She was aware of this vast, infinite black space, but not much specific activity within it.
And how did it stop? Did it just fade?
No, it was very distinct. When she decided to open her eyes, she felt a gentle, non-audible snapping sensation, like a switch being flicked.
And poof, back to normal size, normal perception.
Instantly. The sensation ceased completely. It's like the inner self gently but firmly restored the standard operating parameters of the outer ego.
That snap sounds like the boundary reasserting itself.
It really does. And the notes also mention Joseph having a recurrence of his own familiar sensation around the same time.
What was his again?
That thrilling, sweeping over me feeling. He experienced it while just reading the paper, even with noise around him. Seth had previously called Joseph's sensation the feeling of sound.
Feeling sound. Another example of senses merging or overlapping, like Seth described with the inner senses working as a unit.
Exactly. So these aren't just intellectual concepts.
Yeah.
These post-session notes provide tangible, felt evidence that these inner senses are operating, that form is fluid, even if the outer ego usually only gets minimal, filtered awareness of it. Hashtag outro.
So wrapping up this journey through session 38, we've gone from psychic research politics all the way to feeling like an elephant. It's quite a ride.
It really is. We've seen Seth lay down the law about demonstrations, emphasize the need for inner work, and then dive into the deep end with the fourth and fifth inner senses, conceptual dramas, and intimate becoming.
And that crucial link to the sixth sense, the foundational knowledge of vitality, and the idea that our reality, even our physical bodies, is this fluid, internally generated camouflage.
The ulcer analogy really drives home that idea of subconscious creation, for better or worse. It puts a lot of the power and responsibility back on the inner self.
So the big takeaway seems to be that our perceived reality is just the tip of the iceberg. Our actual sensory apparatus is vastly more complex, operating beyond time and space, and our physical form is far more malleable than we realize.
Yeah. And that fifth sense, the idea of intimate becoming. How does knowing about that potentially change how you even think about empathy or understanding another person? It's the raw mechanism behind connection.
Yeah, and the sixth sense, connecting it to the ulcer, it really makes you wonder about personal creation. What subtle aspects of our lives, our health, our environment, are we constantly shaping from within without even realizing it?
Which brings us to that final little detail Seth mentioned. Looking forward to spring and the air from the open windows.
Right. He said he'd enjoy it, even if the traffic noise bothered Jane and Joseph.
So here's the provocative thought to leave you with. Given everything we've learned about subconscious will, creating reality, and even accommodating non-physical preferences, when Jane eventually opened that window, was she just doing it for herself?
Or was her subconscious tuned into Seth via the inner senses, subtly arranging the camouflage reality to fulfill the request of her non-physical visitor who wanted to enjoy the spring air?
What parts of your reality are you creating, consciously or unconsciously, maybe even for unseen companions? Something to ponder.
Definitely something to ponder. If you want to explore these ideas further yourself, we highly recommend getting the Early Sessions Book 1 of Seth material. You can find it via the New Awareness Network at sethcenter.com/early sessions. Session 38 is a goldmine.
It truly is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the most profound explorations are always waiting within.